Synergy Practices podcast. I'm your host, Sasha Huapal, here once again with my co-host, Artin Safarian.
How's everybody doing?
We are joined with a special guest today. I'll go ahead and let him introduce himself, please.
Hey, I'm Dr. Harry Snydman. I practiced in Fountainville, Maryland for about 27 years, and then I sold my practice and now became a dental practice broker with Choice Transitions.
Well, it's great having you, Dr. Snydman. One of the fascinating things about this interview itself is because you've experienced both practice startup and now you're doing practice acquisition, selling practices to different dentists. So I'm going to enjoy discussing both ends with you since you've experienced both. And you built your practice about 30 years ago?
Yeah, opened in 1996.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of things were different back then. Coming up with a practice startup. Why did you decide to open a practice? Why did you do a startup?
So I had worked as an associate for 3 or 4 years. I was ready to kind of have my own business, and I spent about a year or two looking for a practice to purchase, actually with a good friend of mine from dental school. And after a long search, we just couldn't find anything that would work. So he wound up buying a practice in Silver Spring, Maryland, and I wound up going the startup route. I just started from scratch, and I came across an opportunity in a growing shopping center area that just opened. And I hadn't even planned on doing a startup until I saw this space, and I decided that would be a great place to open a practice. There was a McDonald's, there was a giant supermarket, and there was a bank there. I figured if those three companies could be in the shopping center, then I could start up the dental office.
It's a good way to think about it. And what was the process going over that 30 years ago? I'm sure the process is probably different now than 30 years ago, but just walk us through it. What were some of the struggles you experienced? What were some of the risk factors for you? Were there any hesitation?
Well, there was a lot of hesitation, particularly my wife. My wife was definitely hesitant for sure. But back then there weren't as many lender options. So I just I found a great. First thing I did is found a great dental accountant with dental experience. Actually, my accountant actually was a dentist who became an accountant, and then so I was a great advisor. So I think the first thing was to get a good team of people together, and then found a great lender with M&T Bank at the time. And actually wasn't even M&T at that point. I think it was like First National Bank or something like that. And just kind of went through the steps. I had no idea what I was doing, so I just kind of relied on my team. And wound up getting a great partner for equipment and the build out. It happened to be Benco Dental. And they planned the office with me, and we wound up opening. I think it's about a year or so to construct it and open it up. And from there, it just kind of took off.
So back then, was it hard to find staff? Did you go through any experience in taking a long time to find staff?
It certainly wasn't as hard as it is now, for sure. I mean, I don't remember too many challenges with finding staff. I think I started out with I think I had 2 operatories, 1 assistant, and just 1 front desk person. Didn't even have a hygienist, and I just worked 3 days a week or so. 3 days a week or so, just myself, and it took I worked 2 days a week in another area to supplement my incomes, and it took about 2 years till I was able to build up my schedule 3 days a week full, and had hired a hygienist, and she was 3 days a week full. We quickly put in a 3rd operatory, I think, after she started, or wherever she started, and then I went full time after the 2 years, and then we put in the 4th operatory maybe 3 or 4 years later.
So it was 4 operatory office total?
The first office was 4 operatory office, yes.
You started with 2 and then added the 3rd one after 2 years and then the 4th one?
Yeah, maybe 3 or 4 years after that.
Okay, so you were full operational after 2 years?
Yeah, after 2 years I had left the other associate position after the 2nd year.
Okay.
Yeah.
But looking back at it, could you have done it faster, or would you have done it faster? As in, would you have put in the 4th operatory faster?
I don't think so. I mean, I think it took time to kind of grow and get a footprint there. Luckily, in a shopping center like I was in, I didn't do any advertising. There was a lot of walk-through traffic. Again, there was a supermarket there, McDonald's, a bank, pretty active shopping center. And so I also took a lot of PPOs. At that time, I did a lot of HMOs. My idea was to get people in the chair. I didn't really care what type of insurance they had. I didn't care what the reimbursement rates were. I just wanted people to get in. I wanted to provide good service. I wanted them to talk to their friends. And then slowly over time, I started to kind of weed out the HMOs and some of the bad paying PPOs, over time. but it got me going.
Which is basically the same advice, people probably do it right now, nowadays.
I don't know about that. That's true or not. I think that a lot of docs now want more high-end type of PPOs or want to be fee for service right from the start. My feeling back then at least was just to get more and more people. The more and more people I can get into the office, the better. Some of those HMO patients where they're low reimbursements, they might need cosmetic procedures that aren't covered. They all have friends and family and coworkers that maybe don't have an HMO plan or a PPO plan that they can refer to. So it was all about just treating them right and getting your name out there.
Right. Now, I also understand about 10 years ago you went through the process again in relocating your practice. Did you relocate because the lease was expiring? Were you expanding? Were you going to a bigger practice? What was the...
No, it was more lease driven. I was in a major shopping center, as I said, and the landlord just became pretty prohibitive to work with, and the rent was pretty extensive. So and I was growing, and I could have used the fifth operatory, which is what I did. I wound up moving about half a mile away and putting in a fifth operatory. So I built a brand new office, and I actually opened right across the hall from another dentist who was already there.
Okay.
I didn't care though because my practice was already established, and I'd been working at that point for 15 years. And again, Benco did the build out again. Actually, in that case, Benco did the design, but the landlord required me to use their construction company to build up the office.
So you moved, Art, you moved from a retail space to what type of space?
So, good question. So my second office was office space on top of retail space.
Oh, so like a two-story.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, those are our favorites.
Yeah, the
actually.
first story was this was in Owings Mills. The first story was all retail, and I was like directly above the retail.
And obviously, you found that you get all the benefits of the ground retail without the high storefront costs. Is that why you?
Correct. And I still had signage, on the second floor, a big neon sign, and yeah, the rent was significantly lower, probably half of what I was paying at the
Half
first
of
location.
what you were paying.
Yeah,
Wow.
the first location was extremely expensive.
How far away was your first office from your location?
Less than half a mile.
Half mile. So you didn't lose any patients?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Just transferring off, going
Yeah,
to a
no.
different
Yeah,
location.
no. And in fact, most of the patients loved it because it was a brand new office, new equipment, all new chairs. They loved it. So
It's a great question Art's asking because a lot of our listeners will say, I'm nervous about moving a mile away. Like we've had this question, what percentage of patients can I expect to lose moving? And I'm like, it's case by case, we get that, so getting your insight's really helpful. You're in a major metropolitan city and you're outside of a metro, you're maybe going to lose some patients, we get that. But that's why we were kind of diving into that.
I wasn't worried about losing patients. I wasn't worried about the dentist across the hall. I didn't really
At
care.
that time, we were established enough.
Yeah, it was not a
be
problem.
solved. And then when you moved, did you just equip your fifth op as well, or you waited?
Yeah, no. I put the fifth op in right away, yeah.
All right, so one question I have, you said the first one Benco built, I want to clarify. Was Benco the contractor, or they probably work with a contractor? I don't think they did construction themselves.
I think probably worked with the contractor.
The second one, they used the landlord's contractor.
Correct.
The first one, they probably brought in a contractor.
Correct. They did design in both, and I guess Benco brought on a contractor to do the actual construction. The second one, for sure, the landlord required their electrical.
Their eyes and ears.
Yeah,
on
correct.
It. Yeah, I got it. Was there any difference in the first process versus the second process?
Second process was definitely more extensive. Bigger office, nicer equipment. A little bit more build out. It was a bigger space. I went from about 1,200 square feet to I think about 1,750. The other part of it was I used a third party company for the cabinetry. So there was some kind of back and forth between the construction people and the cabinet people about who if things went wrong, who was to blame. So that was a little bit of an issue, but it worked out okay though.
All right. Well, fast forward to today. Today, you brokerage practice acquisitions. You sell practices. You help doctors find practices to buy. Right.
Correct.
How is that different from startup in your mind?
Well, when the buyers are coming to see so a lot of the practices that we're selling, were built 30, 40, 50 years ago, and so they definitely need, updating. One of the things I'm finding in a lot of the practices is that they were built at a time when the current technology wasn't around, so they may not have had space for a cone beam, or operators were too small to fit a scanner in or something like that. So it's great that companies like you and other companies can do renovations. I've actually oftentimes brought construction reps out to the showings with the buyers to have them walk through and see what can be done, because the problem is that a lot of dentists coming out of school today only know all digital. They only know scanners. They only know high tech. They don't know.
They don't know dark rooms.
They don't know dark rooms. They don't know analog X-rays, things like that. So when they look at an office that maybe has the bones to be a fantastic practice and the financials are fine, but they don't want to practice in an environment like that for the next 20, 30 years. So it's just hard sometimes to show them the vision of, hey, this is a great practice financially. You can change carpeting, wallpaper, and paint in a weekend, and you can add technology, as needed, very easily.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably a loaded question, but when you're looking at these spaces, these brokerage, is there anything that you're like, look, definitely no, we can't even consider this dental office? For our listeners out there, a ton of our listeners are trying to decide on whether they want to open a practice,
right,
or they want to use someone like you and purchase a brokerage practice.
Sure.
So we get questions all the time, like, what are things I should look for? And I mean, you were just rattling off a huge list that I loved of like, people get so afraid of, well, there's a dark room here, what am I going to use it for?
Right.
And you nailed it, like you can repurpose rooms, you
right,
can adjust rooms, things like that. So is there anything out there that our listeners that's like, look, if I see this, I don't even consider that type of a practice?
I think the only thing would be, number of operatories, right? I mean, we know that, a 3-op practice can only grow so big, right? Most dentists want to have at least 2 ops for themselves, maybe at least, and then 1 for a hygienist, and maybe like an overflow. So, I think a 4-op practice to me is kind of the baseline minimum that I would even consider looking at if I wanted to grow beyond a certain financial level. Now, there are some people that just don't care about, they just want to kind of work 3 or 4 days a week, make a little bit of money and have a 3-op practice is fine. But for growth, I think you need at least 4 to 5.
Okay.
Now, you mentioned that most of these practices are older practices. Would you agree majority of the practices that people end up buying, they are going to do some sort of a renovation? Now, I've seen some horrible floor plans from the older practices where people buy and they add 2 more operatories because there's a lot of wasted space. We mentioned we needed things back then like a dark room that you don't need today and things of that nature. What are your observations when it comes to the renovation part of it?
I think that renovations need to be done slowly. I think a lot of times buyers will come in and they see a practice and they think they got to do 10 things all at once. And I usually advocate just like I say, hey, take 1 operatory and renovate that, right? Take 1 operatory and put a brand new chair in there so that you have a place that you can go every day and you love. Let the hygienists and they work in the older operatories at least initially. But I think people get overwhelmed by they see an office and they think there's everything they have to do and they have to do it all at one time. They got to put in new computers all at once. They got to put in, a cone beam all at once. They got to renovate every single chair all at once. And I think the idea is to go in. For me, I would just kind of do a cosmetic kind of facelift. Mm-hmm. Take out that old carpeting and old wallpaper and put in nice floor, paint, whatever, and then just do 1 new operatory and call it a day. And then as the practice grew, I would just kind of continue the renovations, piecemeal.
That's a great point. And I was actually going to ask the question, you just kind of answered on your own. So you think there is a benefit just to get you open as quick as possible, start seeing patients. Don't get locked into having to remodel day 1 if you can.
Right. Well, I mean, if you're acquiring the practice, yes.
If you're acquiring the practice,
or at least acquire it. Live in the space for a few months, right? Like maybe you work there for 2-3 months and you kind of see what's important to you. Maybe you can deal with the old chair, the old unit, and it's not so bad. Maybe you want to place implants and they don't have a cone beam, so you want to figure out a way to knock down a wall and put a cone beam in and take out that old analog Panorex or whatever. So I think that first thing is to kind of live in the space a little bit. But yeah, I think that most dentists want to sit and work in a nice, beautiful chair, nice unit. So you put in 1 unit. What's that? 15, 20 grand? I don't know what it is today. But
a package like a chair. It all depends on the brand you go.
Yeah, it depends on the package.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be prohibitive.
No,
sure.
We're not talking 6 figures.
What is the number one? What would you say is the number 1 advantage of a dentist acquiring a practice versus startup?
That's a good question.
What would be the?
Well, they're stepping into a cash flow, stepping into a business that's already had a proven track record, where as long as they can maintain that, or even better yet, grow that, I think there's a lot of advantage to that. A problem is a lot of first-time owners are coming from associateships where nowadays they're making an awful lot of money, because they're a lot of times working for like a DSO and they're making, you know, $200,000-$300,000 of income, and then they're going to take a pretty large step back in most cases if they do a startup, because they're not going to have that patient flow initially. Whereas if they buy a practice that is doing $700,000, $800,000, $900,000 of revenue, their income, you know, may drop a little bit still because they have a bank loan to pay off, but you know, it's more of a provable business that's been going on for a while. I mean, my sweet spot, I always love it when buyers buy practices in that like $500,000 to $700,000 range of revenue, because I think there's enough meat on the bone to have some type of income, even after paying off student loans and the bank note for the practice. But yet there's still a lot of room for growth, right? Like, you know, a lot of times older dentists are cutting back, they're not doing implants, they're referring on endo, they're not doing oral surgery, they're not open evenings, they're not open weekends, they may not be doing Invisalign. There's so much room for growth that those practices can be doubled within 5 years, no problem. But you buy a practice that's already doing $900,000, $1 million of revenue, it's gonna be hard to kind of, you know, build that much higher. And then the second part of it is a lot of those practices, let's say $1 million or more, 5 operators or more, a lot of those nowadays are being scooped up by a lot of the corporate groups, right? I do an awful lot of DSO acquisitions. In fact, I'm the DSO specialist for choice transitions, and you know, those practices doing $1 million of revenue, 5 operators or more, are being at least considered by a lot of these corporate groups. So finding those larger practices right off the bat is going to be a challenge.
Sure. I mean, yeah, you hit right on it. But help me understand this. I'm a dentist, and you're saying the sweet spot is $500,000-$700,000 practice.
In my opinion.
Correct. I'm a dentist. I'm an associate somewhere. Now I want to compare buying or doing a startup. One way to look at it is I go buy a $500,000 practice, and let's say there's some $100,000 of renovation or equipment costs. So now I'm in there for $600,000, and I have a, you know, operating income, so to speak, right? There's patients. Versus if I'm doing a startup, you know, the startup is costing, let's say, $500,000. Do you think I can spend $100,000 on marketing and get myself to the place where I would be with the acquisition?
Oh, absolutely. It's just going to take more time. So you may need to have, like sort of like I did, a second source of income, an associateship somewhere out, you know, 30, 40 minutes away where you can make some income while you give yourself time for that patient base to grow.
Sure. It's a mindset. It's a mindset.
True.
Right?
It also depends on what type of patients you're going to go after. Are you going to only restrict yourself to marketing to fee-for-service and PPO patients? Or are you going to open yourself up to HMO? Are you going to open yourself up to Medicaid patients? I mean, it's easy to kind of, you can get more patients if you expand, you know, the types of payer mixes that you're willing to take on.
Sure.
Just that some people only want to stick to fee-for-service and PPO, you know, high-end PPO only. That's going to take a little bit longer.
Sure. So what would be some of the challenges for people that are buying practices? What would be some of the setback, hesitation, challenges that you can think of?
Well, I think one of the biggest concerns that I see is, you know, buyers acquiring practices of selling docs are concerned about patient loss, right? They're about buying a practice that has X number of patients, and as soon as they buy it, then the patient is going to walk away.
What do you think the rate of loss is? What the book says. What do you think?
The real behind the scenes.
Yeah. I have a very strong opinion about that. I
Sure.
think that the rate of loss is negligible, and the reason is, when a practice is getting sold, the patients are getting a new dentist whether they like it or not.
Right.
Okay, and it makes no sense to me that the majority of the patients are going to all of a sudden just walk out the door because there's a new dentist. All right, they're not going to leave the staff that they like. A lot of them love their hygienist, they love the assistant, they love the front desk. They know the staff, they know the patient, the practice hours. It's a familiar place. Secondarily, the selling dentist is going to probably write a wonderful letter of recommendation and approval to the patients, just like I did for my buyer, saying what a great person this buyer is and how they fully endorse them taking over the practice, and that their legacy is going to get transferred to this new patient. So, or the new doctor. So when a patient sees that letter of recommendation And I think that most patients are smart enough to at least give that new owner at least one chance.
Right.
Okay, so if they walk away after that, it's not because the practice was sold. It's due to they don't like the dentist, or they don't like the opposite can also be true. A lot of times you can buy the practice and you can get a pickup of patients because maybe they didn't like the old guy who was the practice owner before, and now it's a younger female.
Sure.
Or maybe it's a nationality thing, or maybe it's hours that are expanded or services that are expanded. So why would it automatically be assumed that patients are going to walk away? So I can give you the example. In my practice, I sold it, and my buyer was a wonderful young dentist that was doing very well, and I left after I think maybe 6 weeks. It was like under 2 months, and I think the only patients that may have left may have been like my close friends and family. Not even, I think even some of them stayed. So
Right.
I don't think that there's this huge amount of attrition that is going to automatically occur. Again, a patient leaving the practice is going to go to a brand new practice. They don't know that dentist.
Right.
They don't know that staff. They don't know those hours. They don't know what kind of procedures
Sure.
they do. They don't know if they take their insurance. So to me, the patient are going to give the new owner hopefully at least one opportunity just to kind of meet them, see what they can do, what their personality is like. And then if they leave, it's because of the dentist, or
Right.
because of maybe something like that. The other thing is, I think that it's very important for the new owner, the buyer, to make sure that the staff is on board. That's the most important thing, right? Because if the staff buys into the new,
Sure. And that was my next question.
Yeah.
What are the chances of a staff staying with the new owner as well?
well, again, that's the wild card, right? I
Right.
mean, but I think that if you're the new owner and you come in and start changing all kinds of hours, and you kind of want to renegotiate salaries and paid time off and things like that, you're gonna have a problem. I mean, I usually advocate for a new owner to do nothing new for 6 months.
Oh, that's good advice.
Just see who, get your own feel for the staff. Who's good, who's not good, who's dedicated, who's not dedicated, and then make changes there.
But do you also recommend for the new owner to keep the existing doctor on staff for a year or 6 months?
No, I was saying, I mean, they can. There are challenges with doing that as well, though. Again, when you keep the seller on for 6 months or a year, there can become some confusion. Patients still want to go see that doctor as opposed to seeing the new doctor. Staff, if they have an issue, who do they go to? Unfortunately, the seller is no longer the decision maker once he or she sells the practice. So there could be a lot of confusion when you leave the doctor. I don't feel that the value of keeping this seller on for a 6 month to 12-month period is as great as other people may say it is.
Gotcha. All right.
So you're sorry, you may have already mentioned this. Are you nationwide, or are you only focused on this area?
So Choice Transitions is more on the East Coast. We're in about 20 different states. We have about 9 to 10 reps that cover 2 or 3 states each.
Okay, Choice Transitions
Right,
for the
sure.
listeners.
Yeah, and I'm in charge of like the Maryland, DC, Virginia, and Delaware territory.
Gotcha.
And then my role as a DSO specialist encompasses all of our states. So on sellers that are looking to sell to a DSO group, I would partner with our state rep in those other states.
Okay, so great point. If a seller, I'm looking to sell my practice and a DSO is reaching out to me,
Yeah.
I would bring you on.
I think that would be the smart thing to do, only because if the DSO is reaching out to you directly, quite honestly, most sellers don't know what they don't know, and the DSO market is ever changing. And when they're working, one-on-one or have 1 or 2 DSOs kind of courting them, most sellers don't really know what's the norm in the DSO market.
Gotcha.
In my role, I'm lucky enough to be able to be part of 30, 40, 50 DSO transactions a year because I'm evaluating DSO transitions in all of our states. And that's the beauty of my role, because if each of our state reps was doing DSO transitions on their own, they may only see 4 or 5 per year in their particular territory. So by me being involved in all of them with the rest of my DSO team, I can see 30 or 40 transactions a year. I have a much better feel for where the market is, what the trends are, what the deals are looking like, what the values are looking like, what the multiples are looking like.
It's an invaluable service because we have listeners. We have a current listener, an active listener who's in Texas dealing with a DSO currently.
Yep.
So maybe we'll end up sending your way.
Well, we have reps in Texas. Yeah.
So earlier on, when you and I were talking outside the podcast, you mentioned there's some hesitations on people buying practices. What do you think the hesitations are, and what would you recommend them?
I think there's I think nowadays there's, look, most younger first-time owners are coming out of dental school with incredible amounts of debt. And so there's a big fear that you're going to take on even more debt with acquiring a practice. But we know that lenders are more than happy to lend to buyers looking at practices with good cash flows, even if they have their own debt. As long as they've got some savings in the bank, that's actually more important anyway. But I think right now there's a lot of hesitation because I think we're a little bit a victim of the amount of information that's out there. As we were talking before, there are dental demographic companies now, so there's a lot of paralysis by analysis, right? There's so much information out there, and there's so many reasons not to buy the practice that I don't think enough people look at all of the positive things about it. So if there's a 20 item checklist on your reason to buy the practice and one thing is not checked off, I'm seeing a lot of buyers kind of turning their head and kind of not purchasing.
Sure.
I think the other thing is that people are looking for that unicorn perfect practice, and it doesn't exist. So I think it's important to look at if there's something about the practice that a buyer doesn't like, can it be changed? What it is today does not need to be what it needs to be tomorrow. So if the practice has 20% Medicaid revenue,
sure, and
you don't want to do Medicaid, well, you can it's valued including that, and so you're purchasing it at that value. But then within 6 months you can start phasing it out. Same thing with like an HMO or PPO, or it's PPO, we're going to do fee for service. So you purchase it, and you start to kind of phase out what you don't like, and you can make those changes rather than buy. People I think are looking for the perfect practice from day one. And
sure,
I
think the hesitation exists both ways. It exists. There's hesitation when people want to buy a practice. There's also hesitation when people want to build a practice.
Yeah.
And what people have to understand, no matter what you decide to do, one of the first things you have to know is that you're becoming an entrepreneur. You're being a business owner. Whether you're buying it or starting one, you have to know you're becoming a business owner.
100%.
Right? And how's that difference now sitting there where you are today? Did you know that when you were first building your practice, the difference between being a dentist versus being a business owner?
I knew nothing.
Yeah, because it's a big would you say there's a big difference?
I knew nothing. But the nice advantage of startup is that you grow as a business owner as your practice grows, right? You have minimal staff to deal with, minimal patients. You can kind of, as the practice gets busier, you're kind of like learning on the job. Whereas if you do step into an established practice that's doing $800,000-$900,000 of revenue with 5 or 6 staff, you're basically thrown into the deep end right away.
That's right.
So that's
sailing, you gotta be able to navigate it.
Correct. So that is one huge advantage I think of a startup, is that your business sense, your entrepreneurial, being a business owner can kind of expand along with the practice. Whereas if you acquire a practice, you're getting thrown into the deep end right away.
Now, one thing I've seen, and this is a genuine question, and I've seen recently about, we have 3-4 cases like this, right? One of the things people neglect to look at when they're acquiring practice, and I want to see how you help them out, is when they want to purchase a practice, they go to, step number 8, they're about to close the deal, but yet they haven't looked at the lease that they're purchasing into, right? And that lease causes a problem for them, potential problem for them, because there could be situations where the landlord doesn't want to renew it. I know we have a project right now that I met 4 days ago where the landlord, they didn't buy this practice, by the way, but this was an extension of a lease that the landlord did not want to do. Now they have 4 months to move out. And, there's situations where people can buy a practice, not look at the lease, and then their landlord is forcing them out, or they have to relocate and stuff.
Sure.
Is that even a good recommendation to still buy that practice, or is lease the part of the practice purchase, would you say?
Well, I say when I'm working with buyers, as soon as they submit a letter of intent that's accepted by the seller, immediately we begin talking to get them in touch with the landlord. Whether they want to talk to the landlord directly, or their attorney wants to do it, or they want to hire a tenant rep to negotiate on their behalf, we can put them in touch with tenant reps that can do that. There's a lot of them in our area that are great. And yeah, I mean the LOI, typically one of the contingencies in the letter of intent is getting the lease in place. So that does tend to be a sticking point, that we want to kind of get over that hurdle. That, and of course getting financing, are the 2 biggest things that we want to work on immediately.
Sure. And for the listeners, when you're buying a practice, this might be a very simple question, or it might be complicated, what are you actually buying? Like assets, patience. I want to know, like, if you can list the certain things people are requiring.
Well, you're buying the patient base, you're buying the goodwill of the practice, you're buying the fixtures, the furniture, you're buying everything about the business, right? You're buying the cash flow of the business, essentially.
You're buying the name of the business.
Buying the name of the business, right? You're taking over the name if it's been branded. That's why I love when older docs that have practices have some kind of brand name as opposed to,
Right.
you know, Harry Snydman DDS. Then,
So what happens there? That was my next question. If I buy Sasha and Paul DDS, what do I do? Am I changing it? Am I keeping it? Am I buying it?
I think a lot of people will keep that name for at least a certain period of time,
Right.
and then at least for the first
It's a
year or
great
two.
name.
Yeah, it's a great name.
Just saying.
I keep that name for a while, and then I think they probably would change it over.
Gotcha. All right, Harry. I enjoyed this conversation, but one last question is: if you were to do this over again, knowing what you do, this is the tough question. Would you do a startup, or would you acquire a practice out there?
That's a really great question because the environment today is so different than it was 30 years ago when I started up. I think today, if I did it today, again, I'm a little biased now in my new role, but I probably would acquire a practice. But I would probably acquire a practice that was a little bit on the smaller size with room for expansion. So I had a little bit of a lower loan from the bank, a little less pressure on myself to maintain a high cash flow practice, and I would try to build it. So I would sort of do, kind of a mix between. It's not a startup, but it's also not like an acquisition of like $1 million practice. I would probably that $500,000-$700,000 range to me gives you the best of both worlds, right? I can still grow it like I would if I had a startup, but I got room to expand, but I don't have that full-on pressure of paying that bank note, on that $1 million loan.
Sure. So it looks like you would look, as an entrepreneur, you would look for a business that has a growth potential.
Absolutely.
And has not fully maximized its potential. You go out there and buy it and build it because of your experience.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's-
And
that
that could be growth based on size of the practice.
Sure.
Or it could be a procedure mix, adding
Sure.
procedures. But yes, I would definitely do that.
Sure.
Well, this has been awesome. Really great experience. I think our listeners are going to love this. Do you want to mention your website or any of your real quick contact information? We'll also include it on our social media and stuff. But
Sure. Well, Choice Transitions is available on the web at www.choicetransitions.com. And I'm reachable, I guess, via email and cell phone, text message.
yeah, we'll include it on the next podcast. We'll have your information. We'll have the website and everything. Please check us out on Spotify, Google, Apple, anywhere you guys listen to podcasts, and stay tuned for future shows. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, guys.